Welcome back to the War of Ideas podcast. Okay, let's talk about meritocracy again. But this time from a different angle. Let's talk about what effects it's having on our society. Different people have different abilities, and society values some abilities over others. And that's going to create inequality. So today let's talk about how that inequality creates a fracture between the meritorious and the non-meritorious. It's creating new political camps, contributing to the rise in depression, envy, suicide, and creating this new, relatively new meme culture of main characters and NPCs that actually explains the situation surprisingly well. It's not all about inequality of wealth, though. For most of the aspirational elite, aka the Ivy League educated liberal elite, aka the Bobos in paradise, they definitely do have more wealth than the class of people they're insulated from. But that's just one correlation, not the main one. The strongest correlation is their mutual commitment to acquiring an ever-increasing amount of cultural capital. This would be things like education from all kinds of different places, not just school. And to borrow a term from a book I've read, the non-pecuniary signifiers that go into living the life of a coastal elite liberal. It cannot be faked with gold watches or fancy cars. It needs to be seen in the way you dress yourself, the way you present yourself, the events you attend, the things you say, the things you do. You need to care about the right things and be socially adept in all situations. That is what cultural capital is, and that is what all of the aspirational elite are looking for. So, while they are busy undergoing constant self-improvement and refinement, where does this leave the have-nots and the rest of us? The people that didn't go to college or don't live in a big urban city or can't bear to contort themselves into a person with the perfect viewpoints and ideas and behaviors because it just isn't them, those people, they get left in a sad state of affairs in comparison. They have less career opportunities, a less glamorized life, and perhaps most importantly, they have a front row seat to the lives that they're missing, the lives they could have, the lives that the cultural elite are living. Where can they watch this show? Social media, and especially Instagram. And that's not the only place. You can also see the lives of the elite on mainstream news or late-night talk shows, where you can see the camaraderie of the hosts and the guests ooze out of them with a smoothness that makes you wonder if every word they're saying has been carefully memorized beforehand. The ways in which the have-nots are able to follow the lives of the elite has never been easier than it is today. And this has an effect. At least back in the 1500s, most peasants didn't know just how nice Henry VIII's life was compared to their own. But now, it's shown in broad daylight how the elite live their lives. Everybody can see it. And a lot of them even make money by showing off how they live. Look at the rise of influencers. I don't think we should blame them or encourage them to be less conspicuous about their lives. That's not their problem. That's not a problem that they created or that they should have to answer to. But that doesn't make it any easier to stop the envy that many of us feel when we see just how nice they have it, just how much better their lives are than ours. And this is where I believe depression comes in. The envy we feel isn't going away because we always have access to it in our pockets. We never allow ourselves to forget about it. This is truly an epidemic, and even if it's a phase that most kids will grow out of when they turn 25, we don't know if it will have negative health effects or behavior effects that last their whole lives. We're in uncharted territory here. This stuff didn't start becoming this common until the 2010s. No other older generations have ever had social media and smartphone access when they were just 8 years old or 13 years old. And I'm talking about specific content within social media. Not just saying screens are bad or all social media is bad. The content matters. And the content that is causing teens to get more depressed is the content that makes them envious. And the content that makes them envious is the highlight reel of other people's lives, of people who are smarter, richer, prettier, and more privileged than them. Here's a passage from a book about generations and their differences called Generations by Twenge. Have you ever noticed that everyone else on Instagram is on vacation? That's not true, of course, but sometimes it feels that way. Online, everyone else's life looks more glamorous than our own. Everyone on Twitter has just gotten promoted. Photos on Instagram look perfect. For many, this upward social comparison can be uniquely depressing. Millennials are far less jealous of objects or belongings on social media than the holistic experiences represented there. The sort of thing that prompts people to comment, "I want your life." I'd have to say I agree with all that. I don't know if anyone was paying attention during the summer of 2023. When it was Labor Day weekend, I happened to catch some headlines on the TV or on the internet, and all I could see was international and domestic flights are up huge. There's record highs from even before the pandemic. And I think to myself, where are these people getting this time and money? I thought more and more people were living paycheck to paycheck, right? Like I thought the economic situation was bleak for millennials. So I'm thinking, where are people getting this time and money? We get 1 day off for Labor Day. At least I do. I assume most people in America do. Where are you going? You're going halfway across the globe on vacation because you have 1 extra day off? Because you have a 3-day weekend instead of a 2-day weekend? Whether you're using extra vacation days or not to pull this off, what is happening? I thought maybe it was just social media making me think that people were flying more than they actually were. You know, the whole highlight reel Instagram thing that would check out with the false impressions that Instagram might give us. But no, that can't be the whole story, because flying records across the US were broken. They were broken for Labor Day weekend. There was an 11% increase over last year's Labor Day, which was also a record in 2022. The Memorial Day this year was also a record high in flights over the previous 2019 high. Independence Day weekend was also a record high this year. So it's not just social media giving you an illusion. There are actually more people going on flight and going on vacation. And you can bet part of that reason is because the upper middle class has even more money than they used to, and those same upper middle class people, those workers are also more likely to work from home these days. So they can go on a vacation across the country and not use a single vacation day, while they sit on a laptop for a couple hours a day from a hotel or an Airbnb and then resume with their vacation. They do this on top of having lots of paid time off and vacation days, because the richest, best paid workers also get the most vacation days and sick time and paid leave, just in case they needed it more than the people who can't work from home. There's people my age and younger who are flying around the world every 3 to 4 weeks, posting pictures of their food and nature and the places they visit. People who post a run or a bike ride on Strava at 10 a.m. or 2 p.m. during a work day. And every time I see it, I say to myself, why aren't you at work? And if you're working from home, why aren't you working? Why are you able to go on a bike ride and not sit in front of a computer and be miserable like me? Why do you get to do this and make 2 times as much money as I do? And I know the answer to those questions, but it doesn't mean I'm less envious or angry about it. And if I didn't know that these people were going on a 2-mile jog in Hungary or like a new country every 2 weeks, I wouldn't feel as jealous. I wouldn't feel as envious as I do. I wouldn't feel as bad about my own situation. Ignorance is bliss. I know this sounds like my personal vendetta and my personal envy story, and it is, but I want the key takeaway here to be, this is just an example, and this feeling that I feel is being felt by a lot of people who are on social media and see the lives of these privileged people. And that's a problem. That's where depression comes in. That's where envy comes in. It doesn't matter how much better our lives are than our ancestors 100 years ago. It doesn't matter that I now have a smartphone that people could never dream of existing 30 years ago. Humans compare themselves to the people they are surrounded by. And if there is inequality in the present, not compared to the past or the future, in the present, we are going to have a problem of envy and depression and you name it. It feels nice and cathartic to explain it from my point of view and to explain the people that I'm envious of, but this is happening to everyone. And this is directly comparable to what teenage girls feel on Instagram when they see other girls' picture-perfect lives and bodies. My equivalent of teen girl Instagram depression is adult man Strava depression when I see people post exercise activities in the middle of a work day. That's my version. I remember back when I had a job at my local supermarket, I was so envious of the people who had office jobs. They'd be able to sit down while working instead of standing and doing manual labor all day. I'd read about how these office workers wouldn't have anything to do for sometimes half their workday, and sometimes more, sometimes less, and so they'd be able to spend time on their phone at their desk while getting paid. And I just couldn't believe how much better they had it than I did. Getting paid to be on your phone. That's crazy. Well, now I'm in that office job position. And now I'm envious of the people who have it better than me. Still, the ones who work from home, the hedonic treadmill never stops. I think it's worth revisiting the Anne Helen Petersen line of, "I want your life," because it encapsulates the issue really well for teenage girls. The group with the biggest rise in depression since the early 2010s is teenage girls. And it really does come down to being envious of other people's lives. The social media algorithm subjects them to the inner lives of the rich and the famous, and they gorge themselves on this envy porn enough so that they hate their own lives by comparison. The algorithm shows this to them because this is what they tend to spend the most time looking at. It thinks we like looking at things that make us envious or depressed, just like the news knows we can't look away from a horrible homicide story or a terrible car crash. The algorithm mistakes everyone looking at car crashes as a sign that they want to see more car crashes and that they enjoy them. This is why we get served things that we don't like, that make us depressed, that make us envious, because the things we can't keep our eyes off of don't perfectly match with the things we enjoy. And the algorithm can't correct for that, nor do the tech companies want it to. We see the lives of the 1% far more than we see the lives of the most impoverished people on Earth. So we don't stop and think of how lucky we are as much as we might stop and think of how much we're missing out on. And the same goes with me getting envious that I have to sit in an office and on a train for over 10 hours a day, while other people are going on a nice 2-hour-long walk in Central Park at 10 in the morning. When I see that, I'm not immediately thinking, these are the most privileged people on Earth. They're not representative of the average person. Think of how many billions of people in the world would happily switch places with you. Those thoughts don't enter my head and come online before my emotions of envy and sadness do. Instead, I'm thinking, why are you not working? It's 10 in the morning. I wish I could go on a walk at 10 a.m. in Central Park. Where do I sign up for this? It's not just the 1%, though, the most privileged. Most of us know we are never going to reach Bill Gates' level of wealth, and we've accepted that. But what about our coworker, our sibling or cousin, our friends? That hits closer to home, and that's a more fair comparison in our eyes. And most of us don't talk about this with our friends, because to do so would tacitly admit that we are selfish. People can have a laugh together, talking about a dumb thing they did, or how much food they ate, or how lazy they are, with their friends, and to some extent they share envy together when talking about some lofty billionaire and all the money that they can't have and will never have. But the envy of people who aren't famous billionaires, the envy of our peers who might be more attractive or go on more vacations than your average bear, that's envy that people don't laugh about or share with their friends. Not only is the income gap widening, but the free time gap is too, now that remote work is widespread among the technocrats. After all, not only do you need to have the money to fly to another country 10 times a year, you need to have the time away from work to do it too. I've had a podcast episode previously where I quote from the book The Sum of Small Things that the upper class works more than ever and that they work more hours than the blue-collar workers. Well, yeah, that's true in terms of hours actually clocked in at work, on paper. But with remote work, a lot of people are finally able to do other things, non-work related things, when they have some downtime at work. And most of them have a lot of downtime. Keep in mind that this book, The Sum of Small Things, was published in 2017, before the COVID pandemic, before working from home came onto the scene in big numbers. Here's one of the passages about decreasing leisure time among the elite in the book. The disappearance of a wealthy, idle aristocracy and the rise of an educated, self-made elite, what some call a meritocratic elite, means that leisure is no longer synonymous with our upper classes. But there is a cost to this more egalitarian version of status. According to work done by Cornell University economist Robert Frank, there is a measurable decline in leisure and happiness among the wealthy. In fact, while income inequality may be growing, leisure inequality, time spent on enjoyment, is growing as a mirror image, writes Frank, with the low earners gaining leisure and the high earners losing. So, at first glance, you might think that this disproves my point about the free time gap. But I brought this up because I want to make a distinction between leisure time and free time. Free time can be spent leisurely, sure, but that's usually not what these privileged people use their free time for. Instead of leisure, they improve themselves and broaden their social capital and their horizons, or whatever you want to call it. And this is also work. Work of a different kind that no one will pay you a dime for. But no matter what you call it, it requires free time outside of your job. So we can hold both opinions in mind at once. What The Sum of Small Things posits about the elite having less leisure time can be true at the same time as the elite going on more plane flights and attending more hot yoga classes than ever before. Because going on a plane and working from home in another country doesn't technically count as leisure time. Going for a run during work hours isn't true leisure time either. Getting errands done while on the clock blurs the line between leisure and work. On a slightly related note, Oliver Burkeman, in his book 4,000 Weeks, Time Management for Mortals, writes, "Defenders of modern capitalism enjoy pointing out that, despite how things might feel, we actually have more leisure time than we did in previous decades. An average of about 5 hours per day for men and only slightly less for women. But perhaps one reason we don't experience life that way is that leisure no longer feels very leisurely. Instead, it too often feels like another item on the to-do list. As long as you're filling every hour of the day with some form of striving, you get to carry on believing that all this striving is leading you somewhere. To an imagined future state of perfection, a heavenly realm in which everything runs smoothly, your limited time causes you no pain, and you're free of the guilty sense that there's more you need to be doing in order to justify your existence. Perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised when the activities with which we fill our leisure hours increasingly come to resemble not merely work, but sometimes, as in the case of a SoulCycle class or a CrossFit workout, actual physical punishment, the self-flagellation of guilty sinners anxious to expunge the stain of laziness before it's too late." End quote. Thought I had to include that there. Goes a little off topic, but it does hit on something that's very interesting to me. And it hits on how all this leisure time is not really leisure, right? This is, people are doing these things not for fun. They're doing it to increase their gap on everybody else in how much they know, in how fit they are, in how good looking they are, in their future earnings potential, in their ability to hold interesting conversations. All of this stuff matters. Elon Musk, apologies for bringing him up, made a comment sometime less than a year ago in a CNBC interview that got some headlines. He was talking about work from home and that it was bad. And in his case, he was being stupid not because he was wrong, but because he was right about the issue and had the worst possible solution for it. He was complaining that everyone should stop working from home. Why? Because it's unfair to the blue-collar workers who have no choice and have to go to work in person. And he's right about it being unfair. It absolutely is not fair. But his solution is to make everyone else continue to needlessly suffer so that other people don't feel as shitty about their own lives. So instead of having a rising tide lift all boats, his solution is to lower all the boats that are too high. This line of thought goes perfectly with this passage from Steven Pinker in his book Enlightenment Now. He says, or he quotes, "Igor and Boris are dirt-poor peasants, barely scratching enough crops from their small plots of land to feed their families. The only difference between them is that Boris owns a scrawny goat. One day, a fairy appears to Igor and grants him a wish. Igor says, 'I wish that Boris's goat should die.' The point of the joke, of course, is that the two peasants have become more equal, but that neither is better off, aside from Igor's indulging his spiteful envy." So I thought it was funny that Elon basically brings that folklore example to life. He sees the unfairness and thinks, let's make everyone's lives equally bad instead of equally good. Instead, I think we should be getting more unions going to keep raising the wages of the people who do go to work in person, or find a way to cut their hours and their burden while paying them the same. And let them work from home if at all possible, of course. And if they can't work from home, well, United Auto Workers Union President Shawn Fain has created a nice blueprint for the rest of us that is instructive for what to do next. Let's think about everything else the elites can do while they work from home. They use that free time to exercise more, improve their cultural and social capital by reading books, or learning, or improving a new skill to get a raise, or leverage at their job. They can find new hobbies they enjoy, and some of those hobbies might even become a side hustle, and then their main hustle. They can get simple things done like laundry, cleaning, preparing their own food instead of ordering, give some extra attention to their kids and possibly save on childcare costs, and many other things that save lots of money and time. Time that you would have to spend outside of work hours if you didn't work from home. I wouldn't consider most of this stuff leisure time, would you? Doing laundry, taking care of your kids. But it is very valuable free time that workers who don't work from home simply cannot do while at work. I want to reiterate just how valuable this extra time per day is. It cannot be overstated just how much easier this makes life. Just how much easier it becomes to look for a better job. Just how much it improves your sense of well-being. It's like a cheat code. And sure, not everyone would engage in this much self-improvement if they were also given the chance. But the fact that the already rich and elite do engage in this just puts them even further ahead of everyone else when it comes to free time, physical and mental health, and saving money. And this widening income and free time gap changes the dynamic of relationships too. Now that more women work and earn money, their median wages have increased non-stop since the 1970s, which is understandable, while men's have stagnated since the 1970s. The high-earning women who do get into relationships will, added up between them and their partner, have a lot more money at their disposal than an average person or an average couple. Their partner, in all likelihood, makes similar wages to them because people of similar class tend to get together. I'm mentioning this relationship dynamic because I believe it only increases inequality and separates the upper social class from the lower social class even further. Now, some people mistake this doubling in purchasing power from relationships or marriage to be some kind of magic elixir for solving the issue of poverty. Just get married and you double your money, you double your spending power. I mean, how could it be more obvious than that, right? People rightfully notice that unmarried people have a lot more problems than married ones. But there's something that most people don't understand when they think marriage solves poverty and delinquency and a whole host of other issues. I said the quiet part out loud just a couple minutes ago when I said that couples likely make a similar wage as each other, or as one another. Here's Matt Brunig commenting on this relationship on September 30th, 2023. Quote, "The mistake is saying that, contrary to lower class people, upper class people are getting married. The reason this is a mistake is that upper class people are not getting married to lower class people. Ross Douthat, that NYT writer guy, Ross Douthat's point here is that upper class people should preach what they practice, with proponents of that phrase seemingly thinking that it means that upper class people should tell lower class people to marry. But what upper class people practice is not marriage. It's marriage to upper class people." Unquote. Exactly. I wanted to bring up marriage because this is a big reason why inequality in wealth and social class is growing in America. And the more this inequality grows, the more depressed the rest of us, including fragile teenagers, become. Privileged people marry other privileged people, and the gap widens that way. The poor either don't get married or marry people of a similar lower class. This does not make up that gap. They have plenty of data to back up their claims, but proponents of the just get married and your life will be 10 times better in all of these metrics are confusing correlation and causation. That's why their data doesn't tell the story that you think it might tell. Here's more from Matt Brunig. He writes, "We casually assume that the parent that is missing from a one-parent family would, if he or she was present, be an average parent. In Kearney's New York Times piece, she writes about a hypothetical missing parent who earns $44,000 a year, which is the median for a high school graduate, and contributes considerable time and energy to taking care of children. The assumption that the missing parents in one-parent families are average parents who would contribute an average amount of earnings and an average amount of childcare is obviously ridiculous. As with any group, the missing parents are a heterogeneous bunch, but that population almost certainly skews towards below average earnings and below average domestic contribution, with many actually having a net negative domestic contribution, whether because they are abusive, demanding, or otherwise. This is easily the goofiest thing about this discourse. To hear Kearney talk about it, you'd think that the single mothers of the world are turning down $44,000 and hundreds of hours of free childcare each year. But why would someone do that? If that option is as incredibly beneficial as Kearney says it is, why don't people select it? Thank you, Matt. We've got upper-class people marrying those who make $200,000 a year and have no debt or children from other marriages, and they miss the truth standing right in front of them. They may understand that not everyone will marry a partner who makes $200,000 a year, but they don't follow that thought further and wrap their head around the fact that some people are single parents with other mouths to feed and take care of. Some people would make a net negative contribution in a relationship, and some people have debt. They miss this fact because they almost never think about how the less well-off live their lives. They might think these people have less money to rent a nice place and buy healthy food, but the differences go much further than that. The upper class consists of the smartest people on earth, but even smart, rich people are going to have a hard time putting themselves in poor people's shoes. They think everyone thinks rationally like they do, and would make the same decisions they would, given the same situation. But that is just not the case. That's what they don't understand. Sometimes people act irrationally. Sometimes people make mistakes. Sometimes people are not in control of their own lives. It's not just about having money and not having money. People have different brains, too, and they work in different ways. Which brings me to NPCs, which is an acronym for non-player characters. Those of you under 40 might have heard this cropping up around the internet recently. If you're over 40, basically the term NPC comes from video games, originally. They are people programmed into the game that talk to you with pre-written dialogue and make the world in the game feel alive. You, the main character of the game, are much more important than these NPCs that are just there to make the town you visit feel more vibrant and atmospheric. NPCs were put there for the main character to experience. We're talking about a game here. And why is this term cropping up in real life? Because it actually describes the way certain people think pretty well. Some elites talk about blue-collar or low-class workers as if they were NPCs. Sometimes the mask slips completely off. For example, well, of course he or she did that stupid thing. He, she is a cashier / unemployed / shelf stocker / insert whatever degrading job here. Ugh, they got my order wrong at this place for lunch. I shouldn't be surprised. The people working there have no clue what they're doing. I had a person in real life say this in front of my face recently because they were angry that they didn't have something in their food that they asked for. And while most elites treat service workers nicely and wouldn't say such a thing even to their own friends, let alone the person's face, the fact remains that elites do not pay mind to these people whatsoever. They are completely ignored. They're just background noise. They're NPCs, populating the stores and restaurants so that the main characters can call or click or go anywhere at any time and get what they need. They exist for you. They populate your towns for ambiance and for accessibility and ease of use. They're not people too. They're just there to make your life easier. And while taking a break from recording this, I just saw a post on Twitter of a delivery worker showing a screenshot of delivery instructions that tell him to do something silly in front of this person's Ring doorbell camera for their 5-year-old son. You know how sometimes there's like a comment box for special requests? So this person said, hey, can you do a cool dance or do something silly in front of my doorbell camera for my son? And the delivery worker posted this request on Twitter and captions it, "Do I look like a fucking clown to you?" And I think that is a great example of the attitude that elites have towards those that they deem NPCs. It's not hatred of any kind. It's a complete disregard of the fact that there's a human being behind the uniform. There's a human that's riding a bike to deliver your food. There's a human that's driving your groceries to your door. There's a human working on a Saturday at 7 p.m. so you can go out to eat or order Chipotle. There's a human cleaning your streets and the places you visit. There's humans taking care of your children. There were humans stocking the shelves and delivering your food during the pandemic, too. They don't get any likes on their Instagrams. They don't go on an airplane every 2 weeks. They don't work from home. They don't get paid as much as you. They serve you, the main character, so that they can get a morsel of your wealth to feed themselves and pay their own rent. And exist. And I know it's not the main character's fault, but there is an unequal work-life balance going on here that just isn't fair by any stretch of the imagination. The shelf stockers should be able to order groceries to their door, and go out on the weekend, and go on vacation as often as the wealthy do. But they don't. They can't afford it, and they don't have enough time off or emergency funds to take off work. So you can imagine, not everyone can be the main character. If everyone's a main character, no one is. Here's a passage from the book Generations, again, by Jean Twenge. Quote, 200 years ago, say in early 1800s Regency-era England, when Jane Austen's novels take place, behaviors and life choices were heavily constrained. Gender, race, and class were destiny. Many boys entered the same profession as their fathers. Nearly all upper-class women married by age 25 and had children. Those of the lower classes married or became servants. Lower-class men and all women could not vote, and slavery was legal. There were some individual freedoms, particularly for upper-class men, but even those men were required to follow strict rules for dress, speech, and behavior. The culture strongly promoted the idea that individuals should sacrifice for the greater good, with, for example, young men expected to fight in the military if they were asked. Over the decades, these social rules began to fall. By the 1960s and 1970s, the highly individualistic world we know today had begun to emerge in many countries around the world. Personal choice was paramount. The U.S. military became an all-volunteer force, and do your own thing became a mantra. Sacrificing for the greater good was less prized. Treating people as individuals means setting aside the idea of group membership as destiny, which gave rise to movements for individual rights based on gender, race, and class, enshrining equality as a core value of the culture. With so much reliance on the self, it was important that people feel good about themselves, so viewing the self positively received more emphasis. Between 1980 and 2019, individualistic phrases promoting self-expression and positivity became steadily more common in the 25 million books scanned in by Google. You can try this database yourself by Googling Ngram Viewer. That's Ngram. Assuming verbal language mirrored written language, boomers growing up in the 1950s were only rarely told, "Just be yourself," or "You're special." But millennials and Gen Zers heard these phrases much more often. End quote. I think this is a good introduction to help us realize just how much has changed. And of course, I think a lot of these changes were positive, but there are also negative effects of individualism. There are downstream effects that occur when people are told that they are special and unique. They begin to think of themselves as the main characters and the rest of the world as NPCs. They worship the needs and desires of the self. Here's more from the book Generations again. Quote, "Why are millennials having fewer kids and waiting longer to have them? Two of the usual causes are involved: the slow life and individualism. The core feature of the slow life strategy is waiting longer to have children and having fewer children when you do. Lives are longer and children take more resources to raise, so people wait until they are more established to have kids. When younger adults who don't want children are asked why, the majority in national polls name not financial issues or climate change, but reasons centered on individualism, such as the desire for more leisure time, wanting more personal independence, and the choice-based, matter-of-fact, "I just don't want them." End quote. Bingo! We have a winner. And college-educated women are busy as hell. Like, they are really busy being girl bosses. Nobody has leisure time for kids anymore. They spend their leisure time getting deeper into their career or their own mental and physical health. We're starting to drop the social norm of having to get together with a significant other. We worship the self too much. It's too much of a sacrifice to have a partner who doesn't want to do the same thing as you all the time, and who you feel obligated to spend time and money with when you otherwise wouldn't spend that same time and money the same way if you were just alone by yourself. And honestly, I can't blame anyone for feeling this way. I actually feel this way myself, somewhat. Girls are girl bossing, hanging out more with their girlfriends and focusing on their careers and life experiences, whether they're in a relationship or not. And guys are following this path with their own flair, becoming less career-oriented and instead creating an uptick in gym bro culture and time spent gaming. These are the things girls and guys do when they have time to themselves and do what they actually like doing. This rise of individualism explains most of what I've said earlier in the podcast. It explains the drop in marriage, and when people do get married, it explains that they're not settling. They're only going to marry the person that makes just as much money as them or more, or that has no debt like they do, or has a college degree like they do. Why settle when you can just wait for the right person or not get married at all? People have less loyalty to their employers. I'm completely on board with that, as you might imagine. But you see the idea here. People are looking out for number one. There's no us in this world anymore. People think less about the waitress or waiter that's serving them, or the mailman. I got mine. I don't have enough time to worry about how much money the mailman's making. I'm too busy on Instagram trying to see how I can one-up my friend by taking a longer and more extravagant vacation than they did, or hiking a higher mountain than they did. And to tie this all back to the rising rates of depression, let's go back once more, the final time, to generations. Quote, "What makes you happy? For most people, it's spending time with friends and family and feeling like a part of a community. With millennials less likely to be partnered and less likely to belong to a religious community, more are cut off from what have historically been people's main sources of social interaction. And contrary to the urban tribes idea, friends have not stepped in to fill the gap. In a 2019 poll, 22% of millennials said they had no friends, compared to only 9% of boomers. Perhaps as a result, 30% of millennials said they often or always felt lonely, compared to 15% of boomers. In the individualistic culture millennials have known all of their lives, individual freedom is valued over the tight social bonds of institutions like marriage and religion. Although individualism has many upsides, its risks include isolation and loneliness, and their bedfellows, unhappiness and depression. The lone self is a weak foundation for robust mental health. Humans need social relationships to be happy and fulfilled in life. That is especially true as people age past young adulthood. This might be why millennials were happier as teens but not as adults. Individualism and freedom feel good when you're young, but empty when you're older." End quote. And like all good podcasts, I will leave you with a Barbie movie reference. Freddie DeBoer also recently wrote about the rise of individualism, and he uses the recent Barbie film and Disney films to show where our culture is heading when it comes to relationships. And he has the same worries that Jean Twenge does in her book Generations. He writes, quote, "In emphasizing that Ken needs to look past romantic love and search for satisfaction within, Barbie is of course also staking a claim about her own identity and value. In doing so, she's joining with a broad trend in kid-friendly entertainment. We no longer make movies where a heroine's destiny is to fall in love. If you look at Disney movies in particular, the classic storyline of the protagonist getting her man in the end has been definitively retired. The last movie of theirs that can be said to hold romantic love as the fundamental goal of the protagonist is Tangled. And even that's debatable. Frozen and its sequel very directly reject that story structure, while films like Moana and Raya and the Last Dragon are indifferent to it. And you know, that's all fine. There's lots of different good stories out there. But I do think that the out-and-out abandonment of the notion that love is the noblest pursuit of human life says a lot about our cult of self-worship. Because once you've dropped the romantic ideal, that's all our culture really has to offer. Barbie relays this message explicitly through the lecture Ken receives. You can't base your value on romantic love, and so you must make yourself the locus of your own emotional life. You have to be Ken-enough. The individual problem is that telling people they are enough is a cruel thing to do, because they aren't enough. None of us is enough. I don't know you personally, but I can still say with great confidence that you are not enough. If you go through life uncritically accepting the Instagram ideology that you can hashtag manifest everything you deserve because you practice hashtag self-care and are hashtag valid, on a long enough time frame, you're going to end up alone and miserable and profoundly aware that the idea of total emotional self-sufficiency is a transparent lie. Human beings need other human beings. End quote. Thanks for listening. See you next time.